So, welcome to the stage, Mr. Charly Poly from Paris, France, Senior Software Engineer. Welcome. Hi Charly, comment ça va?
Hi Vasil. I'm doing good. So hi everyone, I'm going to share my screen now to start the presentation. I hope you're all doing well and stay safe during those time. Let's go. So yeah. Is my screen sharing properly? Yes, I guess. Okay, so let's get started and talk about Maintainable React. So first, quick introduction. So my name is Charlie. I'm a senior software engineer double. So we are helping executives being more efficient at work by matching them with the best assistant, but also providing the best delegation tool on mobile and web. I'm passionate about web engineering for 15 years now. And I write on Medium and also on the Honest Engineering blog, speak at meetups and conferences, mainly around React, TypeScript, and GraphQL, new web technologies. So why can we talk about maintainable React? In order to answer this question, let's have a very quick look to front-end history. Before 2000, JavaScript was mainly used to make small enhancements on top of web pages. So it was the era of jQuery and later Prototype. The new API, XML HTTP request in 2002, alongside also new libraries like Backbone, brought some improvement, but still JavaScript and front-end was more like small widget on top of web pages. It's only with the rise of modern JavaScript framework in the early 2010 that brought a lot of new capability to front-end, like advanced pattern inspired from other software like on the backend environment, but also clear separation of consent with the component pattern, state management at the application level, and also the improvement of the HTML5 API, broader API, and the JavaScript language itself, that we started to have like real front end as we know today. And I worked on both sides, like backend and front end in the past years, and all this to say that modern front end is complex software. And even if library like React are handling most of the most complex challenges on the front end, like performances, rendering, low-level DOM manipulation, our mission as front-end engineer is more than ever to make sure that we build application in a scalable and sustainable way. In other words, in a maintainable way. So what means maintainable React? Maintainable React app is about code that is, first, easy to navigate, because you don't want to end up having like a big application with hundreds of components as a big plate of spaghetti when you cannot find anything. It's code that is easy to change, because you will have to add new features, but also update existing one. Code that is easy to test, because tests will help you to refactor, break things fast with confidence. And of course, stable. So today we're going to cover what is maintainable React by talking about these 4 pillars in 4 different sections. So let's get started. How to make your React app easy to navigate. A few years ago, I was working in an early stage company that was building a freelance marketplace with an embedded project management tool. Teams could do a lot of things around project, like talking around a specific project in a dedicated chat, listing all the project of a workspace, going to project timeline and add posts like on Facebook in order to collaborate, but also going to the freelance marketplace, go on a freelance profile and add this freelance to a shortlist in order to hire him and onboarding of the project. This led to a high number of contextual components just for the project resource. And this is an example for only the project resource among the many other resources and especially subparts of this application. So in order to organize this application and being able to navigate in this application with ease, we established a React component naming convention. So let's take a look at it. The React component had to follow this convention that was made of 4 parts, with one mandatory that was also, of course, the component name itself. So let's have a closer look at what it means and how it helped us to scale. First, there is a domain, because most of the modern and complex React app are embedding many products. And that was the case, for example, of this application. We had on one hand, the freelance marketplace that was a public and authenticated product of this React application. On the other hand, the project management tool that was made of workspaces, of team, and totally authenticated. So this React app was made of 2 domains, space, that was the project management tool, and a community that was the freelance marketplace. And this is the domain. The context are the different subparts or features of your product. So for example, on the freelance marketplace, there was a search, there was a profile system. On the project management tool, there was like the timeline, as I said, like the project view, etc., etc. The component name, of course, is the most obvious, should describe what your component is doing. And I will come back to that later because this is a very important point. And finally, a very rare one that was pretty interesting sometimes was the type of component, because a type of component is determining also a subset of common properties. For example, an input, we all know that inputs are gonna at least have a common subset of properties that are gonna be value or unchanged. But by putting this information in the name of the component, we know that this component is gonna have at least this property without having to inspect or look at the component itself. So enough with theory, let's look at real examples. So for example, we add this component, the A community add to shortlist button. So we know that it's a button and it belongs to the add to shortlist feature from A community. But just reading the name of this component, we know where it belongs in the application, actually what it do in terms of responsibility. So A community was a freelance marketplace, and the shortlist, as I described earlier, was the mechanism that allowed to pre-select freelance in order to add them to a project. Another good example, for example, are global components. So on this application, we had a sidebar, like on the old Facebook that was containing the chat. And this sidebar was part of both products. It was part of the project management tool, but also the freelance marketplace. So it has no domain, no context. And here it's explicit where this component in this feature belongs. Wait, okay, sorry. So in order to open and close the sidebar, we had a switch. We could say, okay, you know, it's just a switch, let's call it switch. But I think it's important also to put some context and in the name of the component to indicate that this component is the switch of the sidebar. So let's be having like this naming convention was very explicit, allowed people to locate very fast in the application and also to make sure that component have the proper responsibility. The first design of this naming convention was for component name, but it can be quite overwhelming, especially in terms of G6. It can end up having like G6 very, very verbose. So I would advise to use it as a file-based or folder-based convention and keep the name of the components themselves like very short in order to not pollute the application. So of course, having good name of components is going to help to keep your application organized, but also easy to navigate. But I think that the main takeaway here, really, even if it can sound obvious that of course we should have good name of component, is that doing the exercise to have a good naming convention will force you to make a design exercise and to really think about where your component belongs and what it is supposed to do. So in order to sum up this, good naming convention will force you to divide your app in meaningful pieces. Let's now see how to make your React app easy to change. In order to cover this subject, we're going to take a look at real code and start with the theory and take a look with at a real application, a kind of a clone of WhatsApp that is named Addsup. And we're going to take a look to a reference version and a refactored version that ends change. So this is my WhatsApp application. So as you can see, it's a very simple application. It's loading conversation, and we have some features. For example, I would love to know in I would love to have in WhatsApp, for example, indication of time zone, whether or not my friend is up right now or in a different time zone. So this is a very simple application that uses mock data with a GraphQL API that have like fake data. We have basically three main components. We have the app component, like every application. We have the chat component and the hero component. So let's take a quick look at the code before doing an analysis. So it's a very classical React component. We have the import, we have some styling, we have the query definition, GraphQL query definition, the types corresponding because we use TypeScript here. We have some helpers for the data. And then we do a classic React functional component. We instantiate the hook in order to get the data. We have a custom logic to delay the query in order to show the nice loader, because otherwise it's too fast. So this is very, very detailed. We have another helper here, and we have a loader. And then we sort the conversation and we display them. So as you can see, very simple component. So what does it mean to work in order to make your app easy to change? A component, for example, that is easy to change is a component that is going to be easy to evolve. So here on this component, there is I would say two main problems that we can already solve even on a very simple component, on a very simple application. So first, what we call like component decomposition. So basically, how do you split your component? Here, this component, the chat component, is a very, very good candidate to a very well-known decomposition pattern that is the list item pattern. Because most of the time, on a React application, when you have a list that lists some items, it's almost 100% sure that you're going to have to split in two components. So if you can do it since the beginning, do it. Because here, it's especially relevant because, for example, we have a lot of custom logic, well, not a lot, but we have some custom logic for each conversation in order to compute what is the time difference local to the user that we are listing. Also, some little check everywhere in order to know what kind of conversation it is. This doesn't really belong to the list component. So this component is here to get data and then instantiate item component. So we're going to take a look at the refactored version after. Another point that I find interesting here to cover is the kind of death of the container view pattern with the era of hooks. So since before hooks, we used to have like high-order component everywhere and what we call like the smart and dumb component and basically the container view component pattern. And we kind of lost that with hooks most of the time because now we have the ability to do everything from the component. And the downside of that, for example, is that here, since we have like the React Apollo hook and we can do the query, we also carry all the custom logic and also all the type definition and all the data rating things in this view component that doesn't really need to know other things. So let's take a look at the refactored version and see what we can do and why is it better for the future of this application. Okay, so same application, nothing new. Let's take a look to our new chat component. So our new chat component went from 200 lines to less than 40. And here, this component is really doing what it's supposed to do. It's a view component that is listing items. So we have a conversation, new conversation component for each item that carry all the custom logic, the business logic, and the GS6 linked to a conversation. And also, we removed all the complexity, all the thing that this component doesn't really need to know when it comes to data. So the first great thing here is that this component is slim and it's ready to welcome new capabilities because it doesn't have that much complexity. For example, a new feature on this component could be, okay, the ability to select conversation in order to archive, in order to mark as unread, all these things. Here we have space. to do that, and we could put this logic of selection, etc., in a custom hook. So let's take a look at this custom hook. As you can see here, we've put all the logic of the custom of the data in a custom hook that is called use get conversation. So of course, in real production application, you may need to have like something different, like have the conversation, but also the loading and also the error, etc., etc., etc. But here it's a simple application, and we don't need to do that. So this is our custom hook. This custom hook has the responsibility to get the data and provide everything when it comes to data. So we have the GraphQL query, the types, some helpers, and I will come back to that after. And here we have a custom hook. So this hook returns the data because this is what the view component really needs. So it does all the logic about dataing the query, sorting the data, etc., etc. And as I said, we could evolve this hook in order to return the loading state, the error state. So some of you may find this kind of a lot of things, a lot of early improvements, but I have a small story to share about that. So in the previous company I was talking about, like the freelance marketplace, we were developing the product. So basically we were like around like 50 components to the like 400 components we had to develop at the final version. And we realized that we had to drop REST in order to migrate to GraphQL, but at really the middle of the development. But we couldn't wait the GraphQL API to be ready. So what we did is that at that time, it was like 2 or 3 years ago, so there was no hooks, but we decided to have proper high order components and view component separation and make sure that the view had no knowledge about the data layer when it's possible, when we are not using like custom logic from the data layer. And this allowed us to, when the GraphQL API was ready, so this allowed us to continue working on the application with the REST API. And when the GraphQL API was ready, to just change all of the high order components that was in the end pretty generic and migrate the application to GraphQL without having to refactor everything because everything was coupled everywhere. Okay, so we talked about data, about like the hooks and high order component pattern. Let's now take a look at the conversation component. So the conversation component is pretty easy. And I would just like to talk about one specific thing here, again, about coupling. So here it's nicer because we have a proper decomposition of our components. And especially this component, if you look closer, doesn't use any property. What I mean is that this component receives data, but it only directly uses properties that are meant to be displayed in terms of coupling. When we have to do some computation or some condition, we rely on external helpers, and this will allow us to refactor the application and to make it evolve easier. So for example, instead of checking directly what is the business rule of determining what is a media conversation, we rely on the helper. And if we have to change this rule, if we have to change everything, we will have to change the helpers and not to refactor all the view that rely on this custom logic. So let's get back to our presentation. Two main takeaways when it comes to make your app easy to change, easy to evolve. So avoid coupling. Make sure that if you have views, especially views that have like complex, or if you have like a big application, make sure that your views are using what they really need, reduce the coupling, rely on custom hook, and also on data helpers. And the second point that is pretty interesting is how to have a good decomposition of your components. There is plenty of way. There is also some very personal way or team determining way to work on that. But I would say that most of the time, your designer is already doing half of the job because the designer is building UI elements. So you can totally rely on that, like the list item pattern. If it's divided this way, let's follow this already well done decomposition of UI elements. But sometimes it's not going to be enough. You will have to find the simplest state because sometimes some UI elements carry a lot of complexity. And so finding the simplest state is making sure there is a lot of way to test that. And it's, I think, the hardest part. So some people say, for example, we shouldn't use more than 2 or 3 hooks inside a component. There is a lot of rule of thumb when it comes to that. And I think it's a very good transition to the next section, for me, I think the best way to find if your component is carrying too much logic or not, and if you need to be split state-wise, not UI-wise, is to test it. Because if you struggle to test a component, it means maybe that it's doing too many things, and it's going to be hard to refactor and hard to use. So let's see how to make your React app easy to test. So why make your React app easy to test? Because tests are gonna help you to make refactoring easier. Because if you test the things that are the most important, the business logic or the critical path of your application, you're gonna be able to move faster because you won't have to test everything by hand, and you can like rely totally on test and also on TypeScript that are also ensure like the consistency of your code. But yeah, tests are very important. So we're gonna look at this subject on 2 points. First, we're going to look at all the different ways to test a React application and choose a testing strategy. And then go back to our WhatsApp application and see an example of a component that is not well designed for testing and how can we improve it. So when it comes to testing in React, there is plenty of ways of doing it. So first, you can do end-to-end tests, meaning you're going to do real tests, interactive tests by simulating a browser, either like by spawning a real browser or doing like headless testing. And for that, you have like testing library like Cypress that allows you to simulate browser navigation, browser interaction on a live application. So those are very, very good tests. However, they are hard to develop, hard to maintain, and sometimes slow to run. Then, if we narrow down, there is integration test. Integration test is testing the interaction between components. And for that, the difference with end-to-end test is that we are not going to simulate the whole browser. We're going to use a library like React testing library and Enzyme in order to simulate rendering of the DOM. So components are not rendered in the DOMs, they're going to render in a virtual DOM made only for testing. So those tests are easier, faster to develop, and faster to run. If we narrow down again, we can do exactly the same thing on only one component, and this is what we call unit test. You're going to be able to unit test a specific component. Maybe you want to unit test a component because it has a lot of custom logic, complexity, or it's a critical component. And this, again, we're going to use Enzyme and React testing library. I would like especially to talk about today about the business logic, because your components are not only about rendering stuff, it's also about maintaining state and computing some stuff and embedding some what we call business logic that are very specific to your product. And this business logic can be tested outside the component. It should be possible to test it outside your component and not having to render your component in order to test it. And those tests are like super fast to develop, quite easy to maintain, and super fast to run. So now that we know all the different things in different way to test a React application, let's take a look to a good testing strategy that, for example, I will use in my current project. First, make sure to identify what is the critical business logic of your application. So what is business logic? This is logic that is very specific to your product. So for example, Addsup is going to be like the snooze or the recurring logic or computation. Those are like business logic. They can be super hard to test manually. We're going to make sure it's tested because it's very critical that it works properly and because a lot of rendering is relying on it. The idea is not to test everything that you do. So maybe a good practice can be to, when you have a bug and you have a regression, make sure that you fixing it, of course, but also testing it to make sure that we don't have this regression again. And I think it's a kind of a smart way to add coverage to your application as soon as you advance in the development without having to test everything, which takes a lot of time. It can be overwhelming. And third and last point, if you really want to invest in tests, which is great, but not everybody can in terms of business, in terms of size of the team, you should do at least end-to-end tests for the critical path of your application. So what is critical path? For example, at Double, so we have web application for executive in order to create tasks for the assistant. Critical path is going to be login to the application, ability to create a to-do, ability to update payment method. Because if one of those three features are not working, our customer won't be able to use the application, or we won't be able to get money so to provide the service. What is not a critical path? Ability to upload a file in a to-do, for example. This is a major feature, but it's not critical for the business. So it's not number one in our list. So now that we know all the things we can test in a React application and how a good approach to testing a real production application, let's take a look at what can we do to make sure that we can test our code or components in an efficient way. So back to WhatsApp. And now we have a new component that is called the Addsup component. It's a kind of a onboarding event. And what it does is that it gives the heads up to the user if the profile is not complete, because if the profile is not complete, we lose all the good aspect of this application, like time zone, all the thing. It also lists events. For example, the fact that Melissa, one of my imaginary friends, if we can say, moved, for example, from Paris to Phuket, and she changed time zone. So a small notice to say, hey, heads up, by the way, your friend just moved, so just be aware of that. And finally, notification. A small warning if you don't have notification enabled, because it's pretty important for messaging application. So this is our heads up component. So this heads up component is very small, 60 line. We have again like styling, import, etc., etc., etc. So we are using the learnings of our previous slides. So we are just properly isolating logic into, we avoid coupling, etc., etc. So we have some mapping in order to display what are the missing property. And here we have some computation in order to get what is the level of completeness of a profile and also the missing properties. So this is a kind of business logic. This is very specific to our product, the way we compute it. So let's imagine we want to test it. We're going to have a first program here, because ideally it's business logic. So we want to test it without having to test the whole component because it's heavy. So we will need to extract this in order to test it in an isolated way, in a unit test way. So let's take a look at the refactored version. So very simple, no complexity here. We just took all the logic and all the dependency of this logic, and we moved it to a dedicated helper, a business logic helper. So this helper is in utils, and we have our profile completion that takes a user and you return a profile completion type. And now that this is extracted, so the rendering of the component still depends on this logic, but this logic is not extracted, and we can test it properly. We can run the test, and now we're happy because one of the critical aspects of our application is tested, and it took nothing. It's not complex to maintain. It won't break when you're going to change the rendering of the component, and that's great. Okay, let's get back to another example. So here, for example, we have our refactored version. No, okay, let's get back to this one. Let's say now that we have a regression of this component. We have a bug. So we fix the bug, but now we want to test it. And we want to make sure that depending on the data that we provide and the notification enabled or not, we have the proper snapshot testing. For example, it renders the proper thing. Here we're going to have many issues. First, the data. If we want to test it, we have to mock, like we say, we have to change the behavior of this function in order to not having to make authenticated call and set up like the authentication thing. So we have to change the behavior of this function to return fake data. This can be pretty hard to do, and especially like building like fixture. So this is how we call like testing data, and also to maintain. And another point is like this is the use in your component. It's a very explicit dependency coupling to a native API, which you will have to mock to. So I would say that if you want to test this component properly and in an efficient way, the idea would be to make sure that those things, for example, comes from the props. So I'm going to break everything just for the example. It comes from the props. So this component is only responsible of having data and do some logic with it so you can pass the data and you won't have to mock everything, especially native API. Okay, so takeaway in terms of how to test properly your React app in order to move forward faster. First, make sure your important logic, your business logic, what is critical to your application is accessible and can be tested in a unit test way. Then test the critical part of your app. So look at what are the critical part of your app, what is critical to your business, to your application, and make sure you test it with a proper testing strategy and all the different way you can test your React application, because it will help you move forward, move faster, and also it will facilitate refactoring. Okay, last section, we're going to talk about how to keep your React app stable with just two small tips. So you can keep, in order to keep your React app stable, you have to stay up to date. And this can be a challenge nowadays, especially with the fast evolving ecosystem we're living in, and have proper review process. So of course, this is like a kind of obvious things, but let's see a good way to reach those two points with success. So staying up to date in front end is hard because we rely on a lot of small libraries that are updating all the time, fixing security issue, fixing bugs, etc., etc. This is a graph from a study on technical debt from the software improvement groups. And the conclusion is that streamlining refactors is way more efficient than rebuilding from scratch or just doing nothing. In the past, I worked many times for companies that had to freeze feature development for months, once a year in order to update version, or even worse, that were stuck on specific version of library because it was unimaginable to freeze development, impossible, way too much work. And before, I was really like convinced that was the proper way to work. Recently, I discovered this tool that now everybody knows, which is Dependable. So Dependable is a free tool created by GitHub that's going to create PR for you and make sure that you stay up to date to the last version. So it can sound like very counterintuitive to say, oh, we're going to update the dependency all the time because you will have to break things very often. You will have to make change a lot of time. It's going to be super annoying, but in the end, this is an investment that is like really worth it because you really, personally, I prefer like spend 10 minutes a week on managing my dependency and making sure I'm safe than just wasting like 3 months or 2 months a year. And one important point here, especially in terms of refactoring and keeping your application stable, is that main library like React, for example, introduce warnings in minor version in order to warn you about upcoming breaking change in major version. So staying up to date will also help you to locate which component of your application needs attention in order to anticipate big major version refactoring. Okay, so let's see now how to keep your React app stable by properly reviewing your contribution. So this is a very well-known tweet, and we all know that, for example, the bigger a PR it is, the harder it is to review. And this is what we call the review fatigue. If you have too many things to review, it's going to be overwhelming. And in front end, it's especially true because I found, for example, front end way much harder to review than backend code because there is first different type of language and a lot of context switch. So first tips, try to make PR that are like maximum 500 line of diff maximum if it's possible. Second, make sure that your components are well defined. So using all the tips that we saw earlier in terms of testing, in terms of change, in terms of naming, make sure that your components are doing the simplest thing, not the smallest thing, the simplest thing as possible, especially in terms of state, because it means that in terms of change, it's most likely that the change are going to be collocated. And the last point is like, not the last point, but refactors. For example, I know it's super easy to start to work on a feature and say, oh, wow, this is annoying, I'm going to refactor it in the same PR. we should kind of annoy that and have like a lot of empathy and care for our teammates that's going to review the PR and avoid context switching. So refactor, when it's possible, especially big ones, should be done in dedicated branches, refactor branches, and not feature branches. Last point, since frontend is hard to review, make sure you put some context in the description. Make sure that you explain the big line of things that change in terms of design, in terms of architecture, in terms of state and definition of responsibility. And this can be enforced, for example, with bots. This is what we do at Double, for example. We make sure that every PR has a description. And most of the time, a PR should have a description, at least to explain what is the product context and some highlights about like architecture. Okay, so as a conclusion, naming, besides being helping to navigate in your application and making your code more organized, is a very good exercise, design exercise to help divide your application in meaningful components. I think that naming is the entry point in terms of design of thinking actively about what your component is going to do. Second, hooks doesn't mean that the separation of concern, meaning having like dumb and smart component, is dead. You should still avoid coupling as much as possible, because coupling is going to be a big issue for refactoring and for evolution of your application. Decompose your component wisely, rely on what your designer is doing in terms of UI elements, and take a close look to the state, and if the state should really belong and should really be done this way on your component. Then make your component testable by following the rules that we see. So extracting business logic, making sure that things are easy to test, and choose a testing strategy, because you don't have to test everything, test what is important. And in with a strategy that really fits your business needs and also the size of your team, because not everybody has the same, time to invest in test. And finally, keeping your app stable by staying up to date and having proper review is definitely like the endpoint of having a maintainable React app. So thank you very much for staying here and to listening to my presentation. You can find the slide normally right now on my notice profile, some information on my Twitter. You will find also the React naming convention in the previous post I've made 2 years ago on my Medium profile. And if your CDO is busy, we should definitely get in touch for using Double. Thank you very much.